Hello, race fans, and welcome to another episode of Nitro Talk here on Everything Nitro. I am your host, Angie Morales, and today we're joined by 20-time NHRA national event winner, 2-time U.S. Nationals champion, Whit Bazemore. How you doing, Whit?
I'm good, Andrew. How are you, man?
Good. Thank you so much for taking your time and talking with us about your life and drag racing. There's a lot we can get into. I'm sure the fans are dying to hear from you. I think the first thing I want to ask you, so is it true your first job was working on the clutch for Kenny Bernstein in 1981?
Yeah, one of them. One of my first jobs, in the sport was that wasn't really a job. That was an off weekend because in 1981 I was already working for R.J. Reynolds for Winston as a photographer, and in '81 I was a junior in high school, and that summer they did a points race at in Bowling Green and Beach Bend Raceway, and I drove up there from Atlanta, and Ray Alley was the crew chief, and Gary Evans was on that team, and Gary Evans was later my partner. He's the guy who hired me to drive a fuel car the first time in the end of 1988. So in '81. I went and worked on the team for a weekend, an off weekend, and was the gopher, and I ended up, there's something about Bernstein people don't remember, and that is that he worked on his cars. He wasn't a mechanic like in the Dale Poldy sense or the Don Garlick sense or people like that. Even the Snake back in the day was. With Bob Brandt, the Snake was heavily involved. But Bernstein, there was one run. We won that race. We won that race, and but in between rounds, Bernstein, I was helping him put the transmission back on, hanging the transmission on the bell housing and things like that. So he definitely got his hands dirty. He was in the thick of it. And so I worked on as many cars as I could back then. And to this day, like Poldy was another car, the War Eagle back then with Mike Hamby. I actually went on the road with them for like 3 weeks. And, being a terrible mechanic, there are all kinds of stories. But I think the one, the thing I remember most was when the car was rolling up through the water box and doing a burnout, I'm kneeling down, making sure the oil pan hasn't fallen off. You know what I mean? It's backing up and it's still got the oil pan on it. Okay, good. The headers are still on it. Okay.
Would they have told you to get off the property at that moment?
Yeah. It was, it's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
And when you wrench on a car and I'm still the kind of person, like drag racing was a perfect sport for me because you're so focused on one thing. And I joke about it now, but I can be really good at one thing at a time. But if there's a lot of, you learn to focus on what's important and you shut down everything else, like all the noise, the danger, the fear, the anxiety, whatever you have, you eliminate it. And you learn to do that and you focus on one thing. So even now, like I'm good at focusing on one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. So if I'm doing something and someone's over here talking to me, it's like, hold on a minute, let me do this. And so working on a car is the same thing. You've got to focus on, you're putting a cylinder head on, don't interrupt the person putting the heads on, let them do their job and get it done correctly. So I learned a lot from all those guys, back in the day. But Larry Kugel was another guy that, I got to work on his car a few times. And you talk about a hardworking guy, up in Otterburn, Indiana, a little town north of Indianapolis. A little town, like not even a town, a crossroads. But he was a farmer. He'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock, go out and farm all day, then come back. And he had the rig. They had a small house in this little tiny town. The rig's parked out on the road in front of the house, and I'd have the car out, and then Larry, I'd help him work on it, but it was basically him by himself. and every night. So good times back then. Different sport today.
So you could definitely say you've gotten dirty, even way before and way after, the photography days. And you mentioned Gary Evans. You guys form a team, Bazemore and Evans Racing. Is that kind of where the name Bazemore? I don't even know if that really is something that ever clicked with you or people called you at the races. Did anybody ever call you after your fires and the things you had went through? Did everybody say, hey, Mr. Bazemore?
Yeah, I got called that too often. I didn't like it, It's like it's Bazemore, but it's a natural nickname. It's okay, whatever, right? Yeah. Like there was a time where racing a fuel car was so far away, a goal so far away, it just was never going to happen. And then I was really fortunate. It happened, and largely thanks to Gary Evans and even Ted Combus, So Gary and I were able to start our own team because we worked for Ted, and Ted. I brought some sponsorship. We were hustling sponsors and deals to keep that thing going. And Ted, he ended up, he owed us our wages. And when it became obvious to me that like we couldn't go on, and the sponsors that we had kind of cobbled together and we had some good help from some really good people. And they'd buy a drum of fuel here, a drum of fuel there, hotel rooms, just things to keep us going. When it became apparent that wasn't going to keep it going, Ted said, "I'll pay you with the race car," and it was, I think he owed us more than the car was worth, but that's all we wanted. So it worked out well. We took the car back to Reading, we painted it at Precision Auto Body, the shop right next door to the race shop, and then I had a friend of mine in Pensacola, Don Stroud. He had a dually. We had no money. I mean, like. When I say no money, I mean like really no money. It's hard to imagine now, but zero. And Don Stroud, was a good friend, and he let us use his dually and his trailer. So we drove the rig out to Reading from Pensacola with the race car, got the body painted. I flew back to Pensacola, got the dually and drove the dually back out to Reading on Don Stroud's credit card. And then we rented a flatbed U-Haul trailer and brought the race car back to Pensacola, where Don let us use his shop. So crazy times, but that was the beginning of our team. And so we started with, we went to a pawn shop. I hate to say it. We went to a pawn shop, bought a toolbox and some tools. That was the first thing we had, because we had a turnkey car and the starter. We got the starter, the batteries, and the car. And not one spare part, not one up to his end of the deal. And so did we, by taking the car back when he owed us, 60, 70 grand, whatever it was. So, it was all good times.
Wow. I mean, that's living a dream. You got to say, once you have that car in your possession, no matter how many credit cards you run up, you're probably thinking at that time in your life, like, wow, here's this funny car. Your name's on the car, what could happen and what's going to go down. So you end up going to Indy, have this unbelievable fire. And for a rookie driver, well, you've been driving since 88, but
the end of 88. Yeah.
The end of 88. So that's got to be scary.
Yeah. Well, Indy, honestly, it wasn't scary because I had practiced. I'd sat in the car so many times, all suited up and doing mental runs, and when we couldn't race. And so I visualized being on fire thousands of times. And so when the car was on fire, that was 1990 at Indy. My first thought was, okay, this is it. This is what it's about, and I was relatively fit. I'd road raced my motorcycle a little bit the year before in 87. And so it wasn't that scary until afterwards when I saw it. And then it's like, oh, that was a really bad fire. And but the scary one was the next one in Gainesville in 81, because that was hotter and worse. And then I knew the Gainesville one was worse as it was happening. So I knew how bad the Indy one was, and this one's worse, you know. So it's like, shit, I'm going to get killed in this, you know. And then you know, it blew the tire immediately, and the thing spun out. Fortunately, didn't turn over and backed into the guardrail, but that one was hot, you know. So I didn't like it, and it took me a while to get over that mentally. It did. It took a good 3 or 4 races.
And it's funny because you've had such a long career in racing. Like you've mentioned, you've raced motorcycles when you were younger. I believe you still did recently, but you had a span of bad accidents throughout your career. Fast forward to 95, and, you know, you were, you know, had on fire from here to New York, since you're from New York, like we talked about.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think you went through so much hassle to get where you were, but you never gave up. You know, that fire was in you.
You say that, but and it's true, but I'm by far not the only one. I mean, look at Force. You know, you talk about not giving up. I mean, that guy raced a lot longer than did he? He raced whenever it was. He raced a long time without winning anything. And I was thinking that I was racing for a long time without winning anything too. But I won my first race in 97. So, you know, that's still 88 doesn't count because we only did the last race of the year. So from basically, let's call it 89 to 97. So Force raced a lot longer without winning and was on fire, blew up way more stuff, and was much better at it, you know, even then in the early days. So, but we, you know, you can't pick the path you're on sometimes, right? It happens. And, but I'm one of those fortunate people that was able to do it. And just, you make your own luck sometimes, but you also have people that help you and give you opportunity. And so I had a lot of that.
And you mentioned your first national event victory came in 1997 in a Ford Winston funny car. How did that sponsorship come about? And what was, you know, the factors behind that? You hung around Kenny Bernstein, so I'm sure you picked his brain a little bit, and you realized, you know, in order to have a car and to be able to fund it, you're going to have parts and spend the money. So kind of talk about what it was like to go to the 97 season with Winston and when that confidence finally came.
I had to have sponsorship from the very beginning, and one way or the other. And so you go out and hustle and sell yourself. And I was lucky in that I had worked for, you know, I started as a photographer while in high school, and worked for Winston and RJR. And so those relationships that you have, you know, and Jeff Bird was really like my second dad. And for a long time, like in high school, you know, I got a lot of advice from Jay Bird, and a lot of, you know, he really was like a second father to me. I'm not just saying that, you know, I could pick his brain, and Bernstein picked his brain. I mean, Bernstein's really good at what he did, but Bernstein learned a lot from Jay Bird. And I could, because I was in the rent-a-car going back from the track to the hotel every night. And so I heard these conversations. Yeah. And Bernstein would be in the back of the car, in the back seat, you know, all sprawled out. And, well, what do you think about this? And Jay Bird would be saying, no, you can't do that, you know, or yeah, you should try this. And so it was really, really interesting. They were really good friends. And so I did learn a lot. And it gave me an education. I knew that, like, every crew guy probably wanted to drive. And so if I just was a crew guy, you know, I'd be a good mechanic, and I might learn more mechanically and more tune up things and all that. But that wasn't going to ever get me in the seat. You know, it comes down to money. It comes down to money. It always has, and it still does. So, you know, Jay Bird said one time to me, he goes, son, you got to learn how to use your friends. That's what your friends are for, to use them. You gotta lean on your friends when you need help. And so they got involved in the car sponsorship, team sponsorship side of things in 1994 with Camel and Smokin' Joe's. And I was going to drive the funny car for Paul Candies and Leonard, and then that didn't happen, and so T. Wayne said, you go out and be a professional, and it'll come back to you, and so it did. Candies and Hughes struggled with that car, and I don't know why, because they're a great team, and they always were a great team. And, Paul was a team owner that in our sport that, you aspire to be like, because, and part of it's money, but part of it's also the attitude and the approach and trying to be perfect. And Paul always was, he was the ultimate car runner, and everything is just right. And they won championships, Tharp and Oswald. And so I ended up, our little team in 94, 95 did okay. And T. Wayne and Jeff were interested. And so we were able to put something together and finally have a proper budget. And you've got to have money, you've got to have money. So it doesn't matter if it's your own money or corporate money or friends' money. It takes money to run a race car. It doesn't matter what level you're on.
Was there anybody at this time of your career that would kind of help you in the driving aspect of it, or did you have only yourself to rely on?
No, I leaned a lot on Frank Hawley. I went to a school and was a paying customer, and then so I think the first alcohol class was like $2,500 back then, and I went and did it, and then I was pretty upfront with Hawley. He knew, like, we knew each other, and he knew what my goals were, and I remember asking him, like, look, can I do this? And, he said yes. And so then he had me back down to the school on an off, not during a class. And he was testing the alcohol cars. And so I went down there, but it was cold and they shook. And he was like, I couldn't get it down the track. And the thing shook shook hard. And you lose your confidence right away. But Lana, his wife, said, don't worry. Frank can hardly drive those cars. And I'm like, really? And she goes, yeah, it's really hard for him to drive these cars shaking. And I know he aborted a bunch of runs. So that was like 2 or 3 days. And finally he just said, look, we don't have our shit together for you. And so that was, he's like, don't, you can do it. Don't be dejected. But we went to, so he helped me get my first job driving Rich Fenwick's alcohol funny car.
Wow.
And Rich Fenwick was from Connecticut and had gone through the school, had a car, truck, trailer, everything. And Frank introduced me to Rich, and we, I got to drive that car the summer of '86. And, but the first race we went to was at Lebanon Valley, New York. And I went there, we get there and I go out and look at the track, and the right side of the track has no guardrail. It's just grass and woods and a river. And then the left side has guardrail, but the posts are sticking up like this much higher above the guardrail, which means if you're upside down on the guardrail, it takes the cage off and kills you. Oh, wow. So I didn't like that track. And Dodger Glenn had died. No, did he die there? I think so. At Lebanon Valley, or was that Maple Grove? So there was a fatality in a funny car at Lebanon Valley a long time before. But anyway, so I was very analytical about the racetracks and safety. And I called Hawley and I said, I can't drive this car at this track. And he's like, why not? I said, the track is dangerous. And he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, Whit. And if you know Frank Hawley, you can picture him saying it. the way he says it, because he has a super dry sense of humor. And this wasn't even funny, but in his dry way of speaking, Whit, racetracks don't crash race cars. Race car drivers crash race cars. So don't crash the race car and you'll be fine.
Wow.
Like, okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. Thank you. And so, whoop, helmet on, the thing goes out, spins the tire a little bit, go down there. It was all good. So things like that, you know, you have to have somebody to put things in perspective when you overthink things. It's easy to overthink everything. And, you know, but you've got to, and then later, the next car I drove was this I'll call funny car from Pensacola, Jamie Hotmeyer's car. And again, Holly was instrumental in getting me that ride too, and putting me together with Hotmeyer. And we went and ran on tracks all around the Southeast that were so dangerous. I mean, we ran with no ambulance, no fire truck, no nothing. Just this Friday night, Saturday night match race series. We'd have 4 of us or 6 of us or 8 of us. And, you know, tracks that are that wide. I mean, I'm serious, that wide, not prepped, nothing. Wow. And that's where you learn. Dark, real dark tracks. And that's where you know, that's where I learned how to get the thing down the racetrack. No matter what, get it down the racetrack and don't crash it. And you know, that's the problem with drivers today. They haven't come up that way. And so they don't have that experience. I mean, Del Worsham does, Force does. Not even Caps came up that way, but Caps is good. There aren't, like, none of these new people can drive a car smoking the tires because they never have. You know, Cruz can usually, he hits a wall a few times, right, Cruz? But you know, but the new people, they don't have that experience, and there's no substitute, you know, because they don't get to drive the thing smoking the tires in qualifying. So then it's race day. It's race day. The thing spins the tire. They're lost. You know, I'm not going to say the F word on your show, but they are well and truly effed because they don't have any experience in doing it. Zero. They can't do it. They do it, what, once or twice a year in a 3-second run? They're lost.
It makes sense when I asked you about your 1990 fire at Indy that you said, hey, I wasn't scared at all. Because like you mentioned, you were prepared for that. You've been on the sketchiest of racetracks. You mentioned no lights, probably half a shutdown area of what anybody's used to.
No, just crazy, stupid things that we did back then.
Well, luckily, you know, that's what we got to witness. Everybody talks today and says, you know, the 90s, the early 2000s were the era of drag racing. Some may say it was the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Others say, hey, the 90s, there's nothing like it. And I love how you mentioned the drivers of today, because there is a lot of drivers that came up in the junior drag racing league and, you know, go-karts. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's a little bit more of a sheltered atmosphere than what you came up in. You mentioned Force. So that's right on the nail. And my next question is, I mean, you get your first win in 1997 and you go on and win 4 races total that year, including Indy. How much did Indianapolis mean to you at that time of your career? And was it just any other race, or was it kind of like, hey, I really need to show up for this?
No, Indy. So I went to Indy, and I'll tell you a little story. My boy just turned 16 this year. And a couple of months ago, and he got his car. He bought his own car with his own money, got a job and everything, and I'm real proud of that. But he wanted to drive to Portland from where we live, and that's it's 2-lane highway through the mountains. There are crashes on this highway all the time, and head-ons, and people get killed. You know, there are probably there's at least 1 or 2 fatalities a year. But anyway, he wanted to drive to Portland and to go to this Subaru show at PIR. And his mom was adamant, no, you know, he's 16. It's a 3-hour drive. And but when I was 16, I lived in Atlanta, and I got a media credential for the U.S. Nationals that year, 1979, the 25th U.S. Nationals. And my parents said no, and I said, no, I'm going. And I had my own car. Same story. I had a job and my own car. And I said, I'm going. I'm going to Indy for a week. I'm going to the U.S. Nationals. You can come with me. Dad, you want to go? No, son, I don't. But they let me go. So all that came back this year is, because now I'm a father and I have, of course I'd be worried sick, but I went to Indy when I was 16 and for the week by myself. And I got there on Tuesday. And back then it started on Wednesday, but I got there Tuesday afternoon and I went straight to the track and I walked on the starting line and I sat on the guardrail on the starting line at Indy by myself, no one else there. It's like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I just, took it all in and thought someday I'm going to race here. And It wasn't someday I'm going to win here. It's someday I'm going to race here. And Indy for me was everything. And, you can race a long time and not win Indy. And, I didn't win the championship, came close a few times. It takes a different kind of package to win the championship. I don't regret not winning it now. It bothered me for a while, but it doesn't bother me now. But honestly, today I wouldn't trade either of those wins at Indy for a championship because each Indy is so special. 97 with my own team and our team and guys I really have a lot of respect for. Rob Flynn, Chris Cunningham, Tomash, Shafty. We just had a great team, great bunch of guys. Kurt Elliott, great bunch of guys. And those guys have all gone on to do bigger and better things separately. So I'm proud of them, because it was the marriage, it was the little race family that we built. And then in 01, it was really special then too. It was a whole different set of circumstances driving for a guy that was difficult, and working with Lee Beard was great. And, the performance edge that we had that weekend was cool. And in the fact that we set both ends of the national record that night, but the spoiler broke. That's why the thing went 325 miles an hour. It was a handful, but, by then, I was really confident and I could get the car A to B no matter what. And I was going to. And so it was good. Those were good times.
I can't wait to dive into Don Schumacher. But how was it like? Don Schumacher, man, I have a million questions about Don Schumacher. But what was it like driving for Chuck Etchells that 1999 season?
Well, Etchells was good. Yeah, it was 99 and 2000. It kind of started out as a joke. Not a joke, but so Winston was scaling down and the writing was on the wall. And we had something else that was, and I'm talking like at the 11th hour, it was pulled out. And it was going to be, so our Winston deal then was 900,000. And so our next sponsorship was going to be 1.4, which was going to be huge for us because we already had all this equipment, 4 cars. I think we had 15 motors because that's how I wanted to race, and Rob too, Rob Flynn. And we, it's like, we're whatever it takes, we're not skimping. Like we're not buying houses in the Bahamas, we're going drag racing. And we bought motors, cars, bodies. We had a lot of stuff. So 1.4 was going to go a long way with us. And then that fell apart at the very last minute. And so we were left, with nothing at that moment. And Etchell said, you should bring, I forget exactly how it came up. Maybe I asked him like, hey, if I bring you some money, can I drive your car? And because, he had Tim and Kim Richards, and I had the highest level of respect for them, the very highest level. And so we talked, and he said, yeah, you bring me 400 grand, I'll pay you 100 and you can drive the car. And I'm like, shit, that's good. Like we'll go out and get that. So we did. And in like 6 weeks, we raised that money. And a little bit from Chevy. We did a thing with Turtle Wax and CD2. They had a brand CD2, degreasers and things. And we had 400 grand, and I got paid, which even with my own team, I never really got a real paycheck, you know? So wow. I never did. I mean, it was never a salary, you know, like we'd match race and I'd pocket a little bit here and there. We'd sell some parts, pocket a little bit. But so it was like a vacation because like I just could be a race car driver and could go lie on the beach all day during the week or go ride my bike every day, which is what I ended up doing. And show up and race, you know? So it was, Chuck was a character. His wife, Shelly, she's a character too. And, you know, I'm hardly ever on Facebook anymore, but she is. And every once in a while I get these messages from Shelly Etchells, you know, and it's great. And she's a tough, she'll get mad at me, but she's a really tough Aussie broad. And those Aussie broads are tough, let me tell you. And you had to be a tough broad to be married to Chuck Etchells. Holy cow. You know, you had to be tough to work for the guy. And, but I had the best of memories of Chuck. And, you know, I was shocked when he passed away. I mean, you know, he had his bad habits and, you know, probably 5 packs of cigarettes a day and 2 6-packs of beer or 3 or 4. But still, you don't expect it. Same with Hoffman. You know, it's like you don't expect it, and it's hard. But Etchells was a good guy, and I was able to learn a lot from him. You know, but Tim and Kim especially driving for them. Oh, I mean, it was just such a great like Tim Richards. He didn't say much to me the first test. You know, he really didn't. And then he kind of said, he goes, you know, you're kind of a pain in the ass. You ask too many questions. He goes, why don't you just go wait in the lounge? I'll come get you when we're ready to warm up the car. It's like, okay. So he would lean in, like we'd be up on the starting line and he would lean in the car before we started and he'd say 300 feet and we're testing. He'd just go 300 feet. Okay. Okay. So I made sure, like, when that cone went by, like right at 300 feet, I shut it off. Because Tim and Kim are people that, like, if they say 300 feet and you go 320 feet, then you're a shitty driver, you know? And he would have gone to Etchells and said, why the hell you have this guy in our car? You know what I mean? So you had to be perfect. And they, you know, so trying to make Tim Richards like me made me a way better driver. It really did, because you're trying to be perfect to please that guy, like it, you know. And we had a really good relationship. You know, it was fun driving for those guys. You know, Tim and Kim they're tough. I mean, you don't mess around, but they're there to kick ass. We were 100% on the same page, so it was a good thing.
And you actually won a national event with them in Sonoma. Did Tim ever praise you for your driving, or Chuck ever say, hey man, of all the people, you know, you're the right guy for the job?
Well, Tim and Kim and I got along great. So the driving part was okay, because if it wasn't okay, we wouldn't have gotten along great, you know. But the time we actually beat them in '97 in the final at Denver. And that's one of the best moments of my whole career, is after that race. That was like one of my best times driving, because we both smoked the tires. But Tim came up and shook my hand and said, good job. And he goes, that was a really good driving job. That was a really good job. And he shook my hand. And look, I get goosebumps now. You know, wow. It's like, wow, when Tim Richards says good job to you, that's cool. That is, I mean, even to this day, it means something. I had forgotten about that until now. I mean, not forgotten about it. It's not like I think about it every night. You know, it's been a long time, but remembering that moment is very cool. So at the time, it was huge.
Absolutely. I bet that's
huge.
something you're going to take with you forever. And I'm sure you talk to your kids
about
that.
I had to call Bill Simpson the next day. Hey, I need some new helmets. He goes, oh, just because you want another race? And it's like, no, because Tim Richards said I did a good job.
Oh,
new helmets.
So anyway. did that deal kind of just come to an end, or better opportunity called with Don Schumacher?
Well, what happened? So, truth be told, Tim, there was friction between Etchells and Tim and Kim. And there was friction on the financial side more than anything. And so the atmosphere ended up not being conducive to winning a championship, in my opinion. Everybody's got to be on the same page. Mm-hmm. And so Etchells replaced Tim and Kim with Terry Manzer, which was cool. I mean, we I think we won Denver with Terry, and we were the first car to go 4 seconds up there with him. And super good guy. And then Etchells wanted a second car. And if I remember correctly, like, I didn't feel that the funding was there for 2 cars. And I mean, when racing is a very selfish thing, and it has to be, or you're not going to be successful. And, I didn't want my effort to be diluted at all. And I thought a second car is going to dilute that effort, because Chuck wasn't a super wealthy dude, I mean, it all relied on sponsorships and things. I mean, he's a successful businessman, but not in the 100 millionaire class. So the Schumacher opportunity was out there, and Schumacher had called me a couple of years prior and asked me to drive a car. Like, he was going to have a funny car. This was in 98, the end of 98, Thanksgiving of 98, because I was driving home from my mom's house up in Michigan. And Schumacher called me and was going to have a second car. But the conversation, like, I told him what I needed to get paid, and he just basically lost his temper with me in a sense. And I thought, wow, that's kind of odd, so it never went anywhere. But then a year or two, and I don't think they had a second car either. They had another dragster, but then they're going to have a funny car. The Mecco deal went over there, and Tim and Kim were going to tune that car. And so I wanted to drive it. And so I pressed hard, and I knew some of the Matco people because they'd been on Etchells' car. And so Eric Mullenmeister, who was the VP at Matco, he said, yeah, I'd love for you to drive this car. But you've got to talk to Schumacher. So I talked to Schumacher and just basically, like, look, I'm the right guy. And I took a pretty big cut in pay from what I was doing with Etchells, and then went and drove that car. And then Tim and Kim, it fell apart. It just fell apart. Between Schumacher and Tim, it fell apart. So we were going to be testing in like 2 or 3 weeks, and now all of a sudden there's no crew chief, and Jimmy Prock worked there, and then he left. And I'm starting to wonder, like, what the hell have I got myself into here? Like, no one's happy. Everybody's leaving. Like, what, and Schumacher went out and hired Beard, and, Dan Olson was there on the dragster with Tony. And so we took the whole dragster tune up and put it in a funny car and went testing. And, to Schumacher's credit, like he's been very successful, obviously. And, but a lot of, you've got to have performance and to be successful, and get the right people in the right places. And, you know, that I had a good 6 years. I drove for Schumacher the first 3 years on a handshake, and then the second 3 years were on a contract. And you know, I'll say he did everything he was going to say. The thing I liked about Schumacher the most was, I mean, number one, I could just be myself around him, and I could tell him unfiltered whatever I thought, and I did. And he respected that, good and bad, you know, like, hey, Don, this is where we're screwing up, I think. And, you know, this is where I think this is what I think we should do to, you know, and he would always listen and take on that information. And the second thing I really liked about the guy was he never said no to the car. Like, we could have tested the car every day of the week. He would never have said no. And so, you know, it's that racer, being a racer at the core is very important. And you don't run a race team as a business. A lot of people do, but Force didn't. You know, you run it as a race team, and a race team means you do whatever it takes. You know, your race team is going to be successful by results on the racetrack. And to get those results, you can't have a budget. You know, you've got to, whatever the race car needs and wants, you've got to feed it. And if you're lost, you got to go test, and you got to spend that money. And Schumacher, you know, to his credit, we could do whatever we wanted, I think, within, I mean, maybe not everything, but everything, I think everything that Beard dreamed up, we could do. And we could test a lot, and we did. And so whatever it took, and that was the key to my relationship with Don Schumacher, was that in my head, knowing that he's giving everything he can give to this car so I can be successful for him, you know. Now, when the second year, 2002, you know, Jim Gennard came on board with Cannon and Oakley, and they took Zippy, Mike Neff, away from, he was our assistant, Beard's assistant, and they were a really tight team. And that actually hurt us a lot in 2002. You know, Beard needed a strong second guy. And we finally had good chemistry. Our car was hauling ass. And so that set back the Matco program in 2002. I didn't really like that, but you know, it wasn't my team. And if you drive for Roger Penske, it's his way. And if you drive for Don Schumacher, it's his way. If you drove for McLaren in Formula One, it's what Ron Dennis wants is what's going to happen. And you either take it or you walk out the door. And so it doesn't do any good to complain about it. I mean, I went to Schumacher and said, hey, I don't think this is smart for our team. It was smart for his business.
Yeah.
For his business. But I wasn't, you know, I'm about my car, the Matco car. This is what we have to do for the Matco car to be successful. Fair enough. So, and that's what he would expect. Like, I don't think, you know, if you own a team and you have 3 cars, you don't want a guy driving car number 1 to really want car number 3 to kick his ass every day, right? You want the guy in car number 1 to be all about his car. That's what you'd want. Everybody all about themselves to make sure they're successful.
And you had Lee, Beard, Mike Neff, and a few others at that time in your corner. You guys get 3 wins. Indy, as you mentioned, another win. So now you've won it as a hired guy and an owner. So I'm sure you're through the roof by this point. Hey, some guys never even win Indy. Here I am winning it twice in 2 different situations. And then Scotty Cannon comes about. You guys had, you know, it's no secret, you know, you've had your run-ins with so many drivers, and it meant for great racing on and off the track. You had that crazy staging duel in qualifying with Force and Juliet before you went and beat him in the final round.
Now, the real good one was at Vegas.
That was the first one then, huh?
Yeah, I can't remember when that was. But, yeah, I think we won the race. But, yeah, that was the last qualifying round at Vegas, was a good 45-second burn down. They were good times. You know, we had to go meet with Graham Light the next day, the race morning. Yeah. But see, we were already low qualifier. It was the last run of qualifying. We were already low, so we could hang him. We could just, like, he had to stage first. The thing about Force, he's very slow putting on the second light. So if you go in first, he can be very slow. And so you make him go in first. So, but you don't hang him out. You just make him go first so he doesn't hang you out. And, you know, he always played, Force was, oh, well, was I slow? You know, it's like, yeah, you were slow, you effing moron. Of course you were, right? But he could play that, you know.
Play it to the camera.
Yeah. You know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm lost, you know. Well, was he really lost or is it on purpose? So I think Coyle fired him up a little bit that time. But anyway, we had nothing to lose. And we both of us ran out of fuel and blew the blower off. Oh. Our win light came on. And honestly, at the end of that, I thought, okay, Schumacher is going to be really mad. I mean, like, I'd put the thing on the high side and was ready to go in, and then he didn't go in. So I put it back on the low side, and we just waited. And then you wait a certain amount of time, and then you can't go in first. In my position. Yeah. I mean, we were already low, so it didn't matter. But as the guy hunting the champion, right? Like, he's the champion. He's the guy. He's got more to lose. So it just, dude, those were good times, you know. And that was when Robert Hight was mad at the other end. Like, we didn't break any rules, and we didn't hang him out. You know, it's totally good sportsmanship. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Zero wrong with it. He didn't want to stage first, and neither did I. And finally, he decided he should stage. And so I followed him right in. Well, Robert Hight hit me with the body pole. I think they fined him $5,000 for that or something. Yeah, good times, Robert. Still owe you, pal.
That's crazy. Yeah. I didn't know that was him that actually got you with the pole. I thought it was just maybe somebody else, you know.
No, it was Robert.
Oh,
he was a crew guy then on Force's car. Oh, that's good. It's all good. Man. I'm like, what the hell, dude?
So I mean, I laughed it off. Of all the drivers you went to battle with, Cannon, there's Force, there's Tony Pedregon. Who are those guys stick out the most to you that, you know, even today you just can't get around to understanding their point of view ever, or was it all, you know, water under the bridge by now?
Oh no, I'm totally friends with everybody. You know, we had a rivalry with Hoffman back in the day and early on, and we became really good friends later on. I could call Scotty Cannon right now, and he could call me, and if he said, "Hey, I need your help," I'd whatever. And probably vice versa. And the Pedregons, same way. We laugh, we joke. I don't go to many races now, but when I go, like, I go by and say hi to Cruz. Dude, there's a time I didn't like Cruz, you know, and another time I didn't like Tony either, but and they didn't like me. But that, you know, that's the nature of the sport, and you're not there to make friends. And Force and I, you know, when I go to a race and I go in and see Force, he's so excited and so happy and so over the top, it almost embarrasses me. Like, in his hospitality a couple of years ago, he made other people get up from the table so I could sit down and eat. Oh. And I'm like, dude, no, don't, please. And you know, I'm telling the people, don't get up, please, don't get up. And he's like, no, this is Basie, this is my buddy. You know, let him sit here, please. Wow. You know, and it's like, no, I just came over to say hello. He gave my son a long time ago. I don't know, he was 7 or 8. He gave him a hat. He signed it. You know, my boy wore that hat around for a couple of years. Still has it. And I'm like, Jesus, you know, here's my boy walking around the house in a John Force hat. True story. You know, what can I say? But no, it's all water under the bridge. It's racing. I mean, it's just business. It's racing, and you know, at the end of the day, there's a lot of respect. Like, anybody that puts a helmet on, you have a lot of respect for. I do. And the fact that we were all rivals means one thing to me. It means that they took me seriously and I took them seriously. That's at the end of the day, that's what it means. It means actually more respect because they're after your ass. You know, they are after you, and vice versa. So if they didn't have any respect or I didn't respect them, there'd have been no rivalry because who cares, right? So it was important to beat those people, and I think it was important for them individually, you know, to beat me and for them to beat each other too, you know. So like I'm not the only guy Force had a rivalry with. And
absolutely, that's still going. The list is still going.
Is it? Yeah. You know, I'd have to follow up on that, but no. So we're all friends. I mean, Force is like the first place I go when I go to a national event. I go see Johnny. You know, I do.
Considering your long career in the sport, and a lot of fans today, especially today, they love a little personality. I feel like we don't. I'm not just speaking for myself, but as a fan of NHRA, a lot of people mention that we don't get enough personality today in the sport. We wish we saw more staging duels. We wish we saw a little bit more character out of these people. What do you say to the drivers that are, you know, coming out of the car, you know, on repeat every time? You know, do you think that's just corporate and what racing is today? Or do you think there's a little bit of leeway?
Well, part of it is where we live, you know, in America. It's so conservative. And part of it is, you know, like the owners and corporate America and NHRA. I mean, you know, like I'm involved in MotoGP now, which is, you know, 200 times bigger than NHRA, unfortunately. And those guys can say the F word anytime they want. They can have tattoos all over, whatever, you know, and they make millions of dollars, millions. And some of them are cleaner, more corporate, but they all have personalities, and all of their personalities are on display. And the fans love and hate them too, which is great. And they are true celebrities in Europe and parts of Asia. You know, real celebrities and real sportsmen. You know, Valentino Rossi's been the highest paid Italian sportsman for the last 10 or 15 years, maybe longer. Yeah, he makes $60 million a year.
Wow. All on two wheels.
Yeah. And they take real risk, you know, and part of the problem in drag racing is the driver doesn't matter as much. So they're in a vulnerable position because since it's, you know, 90% car, 10% driver, you can get replaced. And you know, Schumacher's built a good business. For example, like he has drivers that bring budget, and it's no different than what I did with Etchells. You know, Etchells was a team owner. He wanted his budget bigger. He's not going to put me in the car and pay me a couple $100,000 without me contributing. You know, why would he do that? So, you know, so you get different drivers that, you know, it is boring. I mean, I got to tell you, I don't watch. I don't think it's not my place. I don't know the answers, but people have changed. And to sit down, like I don't sit down and watch 3 hours of any race on television ever anymore, ever. I'm just not interested. Like, who wants to take 3 hours of my life away, their life, to watch a race on TV? It's just crazy. And so the beautiful thing about like Formula One is a 90-minute show, which is still kind of long in my opinion. But MotoGP, the races are 45 minutes and then they're over. So it's boom. And, you know, so I think, but that's not your question. Your question is about personalities. Drag racing is a non-contact. It's more of a mental thing, and it's way more subtle and nuanced. You know, like the the difference in driver's skill is something people really can't see. The crew chiefs see it, the other drivers know, but the average fan can't tell a difference between, you know, whoever and whoever. It looks the same. So, and then I think the 1,000-foot thing has hurt it a lot. I really do. The races are over before they even start. The cars are too quick. There's no passing, you know, like whoever is leading at 60 feet, if both cars go down the track, that's the car that wins. And so, you know, in the old days, you could pass and pedal and all that good stuff. So the art of driving is much reduced. And the big thing is the crew chiefs can drive the cars from outside the car. That's the dumbest thing that's ever happened. And it's all in the name of safety. Well, guess what? It isn't, because it takes away the credibility. If you don't have a driver, and all the parachutes are on timers now, I mean, that is insane. That is so bad. If you can't find the finish line, then you can't drive a fuel car. I'm sorry. You don't get a license. But they made it so anyone can do it. And it's just diluted. It's watered it down. And no disrespect, there's some good people out there racing today. There are a lot of people I've never heard of. I don't even know where they came from. But I really don't. I don't know. If they walked in my house, I wouldn't know who they are. And I'm not exaggerating. But, you know, the parachutes on the timers, the auto shut-off stuff, all of that. You know, yeah, they need to fix the oil down problem, but that's not the answer. You know, just you got to still have drivers that drive. And if you make a mistake and you blow the thing up, like I did a lot in the early days, then you might get burned. You might get killed. You might not. You might be okay, but you're going to learn. And that's all part of the sport. You can't make it so safe that, and it's still dangerous. Don't get me wrong. And safety is something, it's a fine line. I mean, but you can't make the cars idiot proof. And that's kind of what they've done. You know what I mean? You can't have the thing drop a cylinder and the crew chief hit a button on the starting line and shut the thing off. That's wrong. The driver has to drive. And that's Formula One. The driver drives. MotoGP, it's all about the rider. It's all about the rider. And people pay money to go see Marc Marquez and Valentino Rossi and Joan Mir and all those people race. And they don't want to go pay money at NHRA to watch Alan Johnson hit a button on the starting line to shut his car off, or Mark Oswald shut off that car, Antron's car. You know, that's just not, it's not, they want to see drivers drive.
I like how you mentioned that, because it's really taken away from the grassroots of drag racing. Pedal to the metal, you know, the thin layer fire suit. You know, there's just so much.
Yeah. But part of it too, see, that's still, it all intertwines with the personality of the driver. Because when the driver feels belittled a little bit, like, okay, well, I can be replaced easily and no one will ever know. Then they're not going to take any risk with their personality, or they're not going to show anger. You know, anger is a good thing. And we live in a society where you can't show anger. Well, you know, when you're a parent, like I had to think about this. It's like, yeah, I want my kids to be able to express themselves. If you're angry about something, it's okay to show anger, right? It is. And we live in a society where things aren't okay anymore. And you're supposed to live in this little box. Well, part of that is sport, you know? But then look at these athletes today, like at the Olympics. And that tennis player, I mean, God bless her, but she, you know, I'm not going to do media because I'm stressed out. Well, guess what? You know, racing is way more stressful, because if you make a mistake, you're going to die.
Absolutely.
You're not going to die on a tennis court, most likely. So if you miss a tennis ball or you hit the thing in the net, at the end of the day, you're fine. And so I just shake my head, because it's like, no, you're getting paid millions and millions of dollars to compete. And yes, it's stressful, especially if you're competitive and you want to win. And that's a problem with drag racing. There's only one winner. You know, like road racing, there's a podium. You finish third, you're on the podium. It's still kind of cool. You finish second. Yeah, we had a good day. We finished second.
Yeah, third
We're on
place
the
means
podium.
something.
It means something. When you're runner-up at Indy, you're shit. It does not matter. And that's hard because it makes it really depressing. I mean, it really does, because you're just defeated. And there's only one winner. And it's really hard mentally to get your ass kicked all the time. And everybody does. I mean, everybody does, even Force. You know,
Yes.
he's won so many races, but it's taken so long that it's still, like, I had to tell my son once. My son, you know, he thinks I walk on water. And I had to remind him, you know, like, look, dude, your dad, you know, I didn't win that much. And he's looking at me like, well, what do you mean? And I said, people only remember the winners. And so you just think that you see the trophies around the house, they're a doorstop. The Indy trophy's a doorstop. It's back there. So I said, so you know, but the fact is, like, I won 20 races, and I was a professional for X amount of time. I won like one race a year on average. So there are 24 races. That means I left 23 times as a loser. It's hard. So I get it, but still in other sports, these mental things, you know, like drag racing, you have really thick skin, and it's hard as a former racer you have to integrate yourself into society in a different way, because you can't just be a racer and tell it like it is every time, because the rest of the world doesn't work that way anymore. You know, you get fired from your job. People get angry.
Especially with social media the way it is nowadays, even sports can get taken into the wrong content. You know, it could be twisted a million different ways. And so that's completely understandable, you know. Hopefully drag racing will take its leap here soon. But what do you feel? How do you feel about four wide? You know, you've never got the opportunity to race four wide. Maybe you're thankful for that. But do you see any type of excitement when it comes to those national events?
You know, I don't know, because I haven't been to one in person. So it's hard to say. I can say watching it on TV, I mean, for me personally, and I'm not being negative, I'm just telling you, for me, it's hard to watch four cars. Like, again, the sport is so quick that all the nuance is lost, because you can't take it all in 3.5 seconds or 3.8 or whatever it is. I mean, think about it. 4 seconds is not very long. 5.5 seconds isn't that long either, but it's enough longer that you can see things, right? So four wide, to me, it's too busy. I'm sure it's loud. I'm sure it's cool to see, but is it the answer? I mean, the answer for what? You know, are we trying to make the sport more popular? What, you know, the sport, I'm not, and I don't want to throw it under the bus at all, but the gimmick, you know, like I wish drag racing. So I went to the Winter Nationals before COVID, and I sat in the stands with Cole Kuntz, Mindy Fry, Bob McLennan, who owns Adam Sorokin's car. And we were like at half track, and the stands were empty. It was first round of the Winter Nationals. And it was really, I mean, we were talking about it. It's like, where are the people? And why aren't they here? And so I think the sport, you know, like it doesn't excite me the way MotoGP does, or even Formula One, for the reasons I just said. So, and I'm someone who grew up with it, you know, so there are a lot of great people in the sport, and I have a lot of friends, and I miss seeing them. But but for the sport to attract a bigger audience, I think the cars, they need to go to quarter mile. The cars need to slow down a little bit. They need to take away some downforce, and to help the show, make qualifying an average. So the driver has to get the thing A to B every run. and know shutting the thing off when it smokes the tires, and develop a belly pan that doesn't leak oil on the track if it blows up. And if the cars catch on fire, you know, that's how drag racing's been since day one. So you have to learn how to drive a car on fire. If you struggle with that, you have to get better. And let the best person win, and don't dumb it down like the rest of the world. You know, everything is dumbed down. So people get, you know, what are those trophies? A participation trophy.
Participation, yep.
Yeah, like, no, that's not what this is. This is like, you know, women. I tell you, I mean, Shirley Muldowney has bigger balls than most men, you know? So women, whoever, it's bring it on, you know, and let the best person win. And it takes a certain individual to drive a fuel car. Absolutely. And I think it still takes that certain mentality. But I don't know. I mean, you know, you don't see people like Al Hoffman out there anymore. And I don't see many people that remind me of me either.
Exactly. There was only one Whit Bazemore, one Al Hoffman, and so far one John Force. And guys like you and them, you know, it won't be repeated. So we enjoyed it.
But it's like, for me, you know, I grew up idolizing Garlits and Shirley and Snake and Beetle. And then later, you know, Hawley, Bernstein, Dick LaHaye. I mean, even a guy like, take Dick LaHaye, a quiet guy, right? But still, he built his own cars. And so he had a following, a personality, right? And he would tell it like it was. Dick LaHaye would tell it like, if you asked him a question, you got the answer. And it was the answer that's the answer, not the answer that he wanted you to have. It was the answer. And, you know, so for me, like, the generation before me was awesome. You know, McEwen, Snake. I mean, I grew up idolizing Snake. When I went to Indy that time, I wanted to go see Don Perdome in the Army Arrow. You know, that was it. And because where I lived in Atlanta, he didn't race in Commerce and IHRA.
Were you a big Ed Ace McCullough fan with his scrappiness and his, you know, his personality?
Yeah, I was. And then I got to race the Ace finally. And, you know, we were struggling in the early 90s. And, you know, honestly, he and Perdome kind of could intimidate if you didn't have all your confidence about you, which I didn't have then. It was slightly intimidating, you know, and but Ace, one time at Memphis, he came over and he said, this was like 92, and he was driving for Larry Minor. And he came over and he said, they were pitted behind us. And he said, hey, I just want to tell you something. He goes, you're doing a pretty good job out here. He goes, but I want to tell you something. He goes, we're all kind of the same. He goes, you're struggling to buy clutch parts. He goes, I have to struggle to buy clutch parts too. And I'm like, what? And he said, I have a hard time getting Larry to buy enough clutch parts sometimes. He goes, we have all the engines we need, but to go buy clutch parts and things like that, sometimes we don't have all that we need. And, you know, that was like, okay, that was a really nice thing for him to say, because it made everything, it put it all in perspective, you know, and it just made me more determined to be successful, like, because I want to control my own destiny, right? Our team, so we can do whatever it takes. And it comes back to, you know, what I said about Schumacher earlier, giving the car whatever it needed, you know, and he did. And that's the way to race. So Ace, you know, it's funny because you won't find a nicer guy than Ed McCullough. You just won't. And, you know, so there's a lot of you know, people are competitive and they're there to win, and you have a personality that makes you competitive, and that is your personality. And Force is a fighter too. Selzy's a fighter. I mean, I've seen Selzy do things that it's like, dude, if I did that, I'd be in jail and I would lose my NHRA license forever. I'd be banned forever. And Selzy would laugh and say, yeah, it's all in your delivery, And I said, well, I just heard your delivery, and your delivery is MF, MF, and you MFer, and F you, and I'm going to F you up, and blah, blah, blah. I said, my delivery is not that bad. He goes, yeah, but it's how you say it. It's the delivery. It's not the words. And I said, yeah, your face was mad. Your mustache was curling up more, and you were going to punch that guy and knock his brains out. And, and it's all good. And so it's all funny, and McCullough, he's a character, but these days, he's a grandfather, I think. So what can you say about that?
And Jason McCullough, his son's still out there tuning. He's tuning on Billy Torrance's car, still in the mix. And it's interesting you bring up Gary Selzy. Gary Selzy had the exact same opinion you did on 4-wide. There's so much going on. It needs to be a specialty race, something that's worth money, not just your average ordinary race that's, in the regular season. Maybe a lot of people forget this, but you actually drove Top Fuel Dragsters in 2007.
Yeah.
You teamed up with Hot Rod Fuller, and Lee Beard was your tuner. I mean, I know he kind of went away, or, I'm not sure what kind of happened with his tuning responsibilities on your car with Matco Tools, but you drove a Top Fuel Dragster and you had Matco Tools as your sponsor. So how did all that take place? And was that something that you've always wanted to do in your career, or was it just a great opportunity?
No, it was, the handwriting was on the wall with the Matco president. Matco wanted to change teams, and I'm not going to go into why, but Schumacher owned the team. They wanted to change teams, and they left Schumacher and went to David Powers, which was not a really good idea, but that's what they did. And so now the Matco car, that team, that equipment and those people had no sponsorship for 2007. And so Schumacher, Beckman had his private deal, and it was 7 figures. And so the writing was on the wall there for me. Like, Schumacher needs a budget. He's a businessman. He's not going to run the car out of his own pocket, all of his own pocket. So, and Matco wanted me to drive. They wanted me to come drive that car. So, I met with Beard and David Powers, and, hindsight is we all drank the Kool-Aid, the David Powers Kool-Aid. And, it wasn't, I knew the first test session that we had that David Powers was not really the kind of guy that I wanted to work for or even be associated with.
Interesting.
And I'll leave it at that. And it takes a whole team to be successful. And, like I have a very defined idea of what it takes to be successful. And so does Beard. And like when he overrode Beard, the first test session, I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And where does he come from? Like, what does he know? He knows that compared to Lee Beard, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So your job as a car owner is to hire the best people available and then listen to them. End of story. And so David Powers, he at the end of the day, his word was worthless. His handshake was worthless. And he had 2 of the best blue ribbon sponsors in the sport. between Caterpillar and Matco Tools, and he still didn't last, but what, 3 years, 4 years maybe? So, you know, that's what happens. Goodbye. We had some problems with that car, and honestly, it was a cluster from day one. And I learned how to drive a top fuel car, and and honestly, I was bored. Like after the second or third race, I didn't like it. It was I didn't like physically driving it, and
Really?
yeah, I just didn't. It was, I mean, I didn't have the edge because, okay, I think they're more dangerous, but they were way easier to drive. And like I remember, so when you qualify at night in a Fuel Funny car, it's stressful. You know, it just is. And it's stressful. You can't see well and everything. And driving that top fuel car at night, like the first time, it's like, wow, this is just so easy. You know, it's just,
Really?
there's
Wow.
no stress. Like my heart rate didn't go up at all. And I'm not being, no disrespect to anyone. It just, for me personally, that's how I felt. And that's, you know, I realize I'm a funny car person. And, but did I want to get back in a funny car and be on fire again? No. But did that element of a funny car, I think, gave me more purpose, let's say, I think. So, but the team, you know, Beard, we struggled a little bit. We didn't, you know, everything in drag race, when you win or lose races by a couple thousandths of a second, every single little detail matters. And that goes from the way your foot is on the throttle pedal, the way you fit in the car, what you see, you know, how do you see the tree, where's your head in the cage, but the mechanics of your foot and your leg. And I was driving a car built for Hot Rod Fuller, who's like 5'1" or 4'12" or whatever. And I'm 6 feet, half an inch. And it just was a problem from day one.
So it's safe to say you're a funny car guy at heart, and you'll always be.
Yeah. But I did like this. I like the way the fuel car ran in the middle of the track a few times, you know. But that year, like the thing never ran good to the finish line. I think the fastest we went was 3:29, but it just never ran good to the finish line. And in the funny car, when we went 3:33 and a bunch of other times, you know, the thing is just really screaming. Like it never slowed down. You know, it's just like to the finish line, and it's hauling ass. That tough fuel car would quit at about 1,000 feet. And so from 1,000 feet to the finish line, you're just sitting there waiting. And it's not pulling. It's, you know, you're trying to feel, okay, and time slows way down. So how dead is this thing? You know, is it about to blow up? Well, no, it's not. It just leveled off, and that's it. It's just out of steam, and it would have a hole out or whatever. So and the team was. I mean, David, it just wasn't good. You know, the guy. All I'll say, when I drove for Schumacher for the first 3 years on a handshake, and I'm not a big fan, but David Power's handshake didn't mean anything at the end of the day. So we'll leave it at that. And he didn't last very long in the sport. We'll
Absolutely. You really don't hear that name at all mentioned at all about.
No, but it's hard to have sponsorship like that, so big and so good, and two well-funded cars, and still disappear. You know, but he was in the housing business, and it was the end of I was very well paid, and but the housing business was starting to go, and you know, so that I don't know what happened, but he built houses, and the housing world imploded. So that was all part of it, I'm sure. But he probably could have made a living from his race team if he had done it right.
Well, Whit, I want to thank you so much for your time, man. This has been such a great episode. You have a lot of insight. There's a lot more. I hope someday in the future we could do this again. Heck, I even hope to see you back on the TV screen here someday, whether it's in the pits or, anywhere. But heck, maybe even some MotoGP. I'd be more than willing to go and watch some more of that if your face was on that. But like I said, thank you so much for joining us, man. I appreciate you taking your time. And everybody who doesn't follow Whit Bazemore on Instagram, go ahead, give him a follow. He posts all of his photos, some great stuff. I'm a photographer of my own, not as great as you, but I enjoy it. And like we were talking earlier, that's just part of being a photographer, doing what you enjoy and the process of it.
Exactly. So, and honestly, you can, you just keep doing it and you'll get better and better and better, truly.
Well, thank you so much, man. And for everybody watching, make sure to subscribe, like, share this video because it's going to go all around and plenty of laughs here. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Andrew, appreciate it. Thank you, man.